Before we dive into this chilling analysis of Ed Kemper's psyche, make sure to catch parts 1 through 3 in our short section for a deeper understanding of his twisted journey. Trust me, you won't want to miss them. They set the stage for the shocking revelations in part 4. Hit those links and let's explore the mind of a killer together. Let's continue from where we stopped in part 3. His charm and manipulation also played a significant role in his ability to evade capture for so long. Ed knew how to charm people, make them feel comfortable, and draw them in. He wasn't the typical image of a lone, violent monster. He was intelligent, well-spoken, and even somewhat likable. These characteristics made him an exceptionally dangerous individual, as he could blend into society while hiding his true nature. But what makes Ed Kemper even more unique and terrifying is how well he understood his own psychology. He wasn't just a killer, he was a self-aware killer. Ed often talked about his thoughts and feelings with brutal honesty. He knew exactly why he did what he did. And this self-awareness makes him even more dangerous, because it means he wasn't driven by irrational urges. He was driven by something far more calculated. Ed's intellectual capacity played a significant role in his crimes. His IQ was reportedly in the high 130s, and he used his intelligence to avoid capture for years. He would often study police procedures, learning how to cover his tracks, how to stay one step ahead. He was a master of manipulation and deception, and he knew how to play the game. Ed's psychological profile also reveals a deep need for control. This wasn't just about satisfying a desire to kill, it was about power. He targeted young women, picked them up, then forced them into his car, all while maintaining a calm demeanor. It wasn't about the act of murder alone. It was about feeling superior, about owning his victims, controlling their lives and their deaths. His calmness during his confession stands in stark contrast to the horrific details he describes. The way he recalls every gruesome detail without flinching is an example of just how deep his psychopathy runs. It was as if he was narrating a story about someone else, detached, unemotional, and almost fascinated by his own deeds. This emotional disconnect from his crimes is what makes Ed Kemper's psychological profile so chilling. Psychologists have often pointed to his narcissism and sociopathic tendencies, which drove his need to dominate and control others. But it wasn't just about killing. It was about his need for validation, his desire to prove that he could outsmart everyone around him, that he could do things no one else dared to. What makes Ed so unique as a criminal is not just his psychopathy, but how he played the system. He understood the psychology of those around him. He understood how to manipulate the investigators, how to make them believe he was a compliant, well-adjusted man, when in reality he was anything but. His ability to deceive and manipulate was so powerful that it took years before anyone realized the monster who was hiding in plain sight. At the core of Ed Kemper's psychological profile lies a manipulator, a master of deception, a man who lacked empathy and yet was so self-aware that he could articulate his own dark desires with unsettling clarity. But as chilling as his intelligence was, it was his emotional void that made him truly dangerous. The ability to take life with such indifference, to plan and execute his crimes with cold precision, and to manipulate those around him, this was the psychology of Ed Kemper. For Ed Kemper, the need for control never went away. He may be behind bars now, but his mind remains as chilling as ever. A mind that still fascinates psychologists, criminologists, and anyone who wants to understand what drives a man to commit such unspeakable acts. But the question still lingers. What could have stopped him? What, if anything, could have prevented Ed Kemper from becoming the monster he ultimately became? As we continue our deep dive into the twisted mind of Ed Kemper, we now shift our focus to his most horrifying actions, his murders. What began as a dark, calculating rage against women, his mother, and the world around him, soon became an insatiable need to dominate, control, and take life. But how did Ed Kemper, a man who appeared so calm, collected, and rational on the surface, become the cold-blooded killer he is remembered as today? Let's explore the chilling reality of his crimes. Ed Kemper's killing spree began in the early 1970s, when he was in his mid-20s. But his murders weren't spontaneous acts of violence. No, they were deliberate, methodical, and deeply calculated. Ed didn't just kill to satisfy a thirst for blood. He killed to assert control, to exert power, and to fulfill a deeply disturbing psychological need. It wasn't just that Ed killed, it was the way he killed. Ed's crimes were marked by an eerie sense of planning and precision. His victims weren't random strangers, they were women he chose specifically. Young women, often co-eds from nearby colleges, who were vulnerable, unsuspecting, and alone. Ed's first victims were two women in 1964, when he was just a teenager. But this act, though violent, was not the start of his killing spree. No, Ed's first real taste of murder came when he was released from the psychiatric hospital at age 21. It wasn't long before he began to target women with a calculated, almost ritualistic approach. In 1972, Ed's first real series of murders began. He picked up two college students, Marianne Pesce and Dina May, in Santa Cruz, offering them a ride as they hitchhiked. But what should have been a harmless encounter turned into something far more sinister. After killing them, Ed took their bodies back to his home, where he performed acts of necrophilia. The level of depravity was staggering. He had now crossed the line from being a troubled young man to a full-fledged serial killer. For Ed, these murders weren't just about the kill. They were about control and power. He not only murdered his victims, but he also kept their bodies. He would often dismember them, storing their body parts in various places around his home. Ed's methodical dissection of his victims revealed something chilling. For him, these women were not people. They were objects. Tools to satiate his need for control. Ed's behavior didn't stop there. He wasn't content with simply killing. He wanted to dominate and humiliate. His next victim was a 17-year-old girl named Aiko Ku, who he picked up on the pretense of offering her a ride. But once she was inside the car, Ed strangled her, just like the others before. Once again, the ritualistic aspect of his crimes stood out: the dismemberment, the decapitation, and the keeping of body parts. The level of control Ed exhibited over his victims was staggering. They were no longer real people to him. They were objects to be controlled and manipulated. But Ed didn't stop there. His need to kill escalated as he found more and more vulnerable victims to feed his dark desires. He began to target women on the outskirts of Santa Cruz, offering rides and luring them into his car before driving them to secluded areas. Once there, he would strangle, decapitate, and dismember them. For Ed, these were not just random acts of violence. They were rituals, filled with an eerie sense of purpose and control. By 1973, Ed had begun to escalate his murders. It wasn't just about taking life anymore. It was about taking control over every aspect of his victim's existence. His crimes became more brutal, more disturbing, and as he killed, his confidence grew. The killings were no longer just about the women he targeted. They were about Ed's own psychological needs. He began to see himself as a godlike figure, able to take life at will. But the next phase of his killing spree would be marked by something even more chilling. In 1973, Ed committed an act that would forever change the trajectory of his life and cement his place in the annals of serial killer history. He murdered his own mother, Ed Kemper. After years of emotional abuse, humiliation, and frustration, Ed finally snapped. He brutally killed her, and in a chilling act of control, he decapitated her and even kept her head as a trophy. But Ed didn't stop there. After killing his mother, Ed's rage wasn't satisfied. He then killed her best friend, Sally Hallett, in an attempt to cover his tracks. But these murders weren't just about anger at his mother. They were about power, about taking complete control over his life, something he had never been able to do before. In the end, Ed's killing spree would end as quickly as it had begun. After murdering 6 women, 2 of his mother's friends, and his mother herself, Ed was finally caught. He turned himself in after a series of chilling confessions, and his interviews with the police would later provide insight into the dark workings of his mind. But what remained undeniable was the brutality and methodical nature of his killings, a hallmark of a mind gone beyond redemption. As investigators delved deeper into Ed's psyche, they began to understand the disturbing nature of his crimes. His victims were not just victims of murder, they were victims of Ed's psychological warfare. His need for control, his deep-seated anger toward women, and his desire to dominate and humiliate were all laid bare in the most disturbing way possible. Today, Ed Kemper remains incarcerated in a California prison, where he continues to reflect on his crimes with chilling detail. But while Ed may have been captured, His psychological profile continues to captivate criminologists, psychologists, and law enforcement around the world. His chillingly calculated murders, his manipulation of those around him, and his complete lack of remorse make him one of the most terrifying figures in criminal history. As we look back on Ed Kemper's journey from troubled teenager to serial killer, we are forced to confront the darkest depths of the human mind. What makes a killer like Ed? What drove him to murder, and how did he get away with it for so long? These questions remain unanswered, but one thing is certain. The mind of Ed Kemper will forever remain one of the most chilling puzzles in the history of criminal psychology.